test out my powers, I suppose. Oh, Veldora was indeed stronger now, a fact Dagrel had to acknowledge. Plus, if I fled, Luminous and Shion and everyone who serves them would have been doomed, and I'm just not willing to allow that. Why not? What possible motivation would drive you to risk your life for Luminous? To say nothing of a bunch of humans? Dagrel was questioning Veldora's very resolve, and depending on the answer, Dagrel would have to firm up his own resolve as well. But instead, Veldora succeeded only in exasperating him even more. Well, if I didn't, Rimuru would never let me hear the end of it. Do you have any idea, Dagrel, how scary Rimuru is when you piss him off? It's terrifying. Qua ah ha ha ha. Now it was clear to Dagrel. Veldora was never going to retreat. Yes, I see. So you've grown able to accept responsibility now? The dragon really had matured. Dagrel had to accept that as the truth, and now he really was resolved to defeat him. All right, then. In recognition of your growth, I will continue to engage you, no matter how long the battle drags on. If Veldora wasn't going to flee, he'd just have to be defeated. Whichever side made the other run out of energy first was the winner. Finishing this with a single telling blow was one option, but Dagrel had just busted out his most powerful of finishers and had it backfire on him. The right tactic was clearly to take his time, be careful, and slowly whittle down his opponent. Dagrel began pouring energy into his aura. As he did, his massive frame, easily over 60 feet tall, began to visibly shrink. Now he was back to his normal size, around 8 feet in length. But flashes of lightning were bursting out of his body, making it clear just how densely packed the energy was inside. Ho? You're a whole other person now, Veldora remarked. Ha 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 ha. That I am. It is an even higher level transformation than my most gigantic form. I call it super divination. It has always been difficult for me to control myself in this state, but you have now given me some vital pointers. Veldora froze, unsure what he meant. Dagrel wasn't about to be shy about it. How to train yourself to hold your aura back, I mean. You mentioned something about gaining further power after learning how to control your rage, yes? This sounded more familiar to Veldora. He had bragged about the knowledge he had gained from the sacred tomes of manga he had been reading, a bunch of trivia he'd eagerly shared with Dagrel, and indeed, maybe that little nugget was part of it, too. He couldn't remember the exact details, but more to the point, Dagrel was demonstrating some clearly stabilized power. Veldora was just having a friendly chat with him about that stuff, and he had worked it until it served him well in actual combat. His sense for battle was beyond reproach, although back to normal size, Dagrel was still in a surer mode with his two brothers. Between that and the electricity arcing out from him, he seemed like even more of a threat than in his giant form. Veldora was ready to finish the battle, but now that he had a look at Dagrel's determination, he decided to accept his offer. Well, Dagrel, I must hand it to you. If you're now able to control that power thanks to my advice, I suppose I really must take you on. The two of them returned to their human forms as they squared up, compressing their energy even further. Veldora shrank down to about 8 feet himself, kindly adjusting his height to match his opponent. Size was power, maybe, but that common sense didn't apply to spiritual life forms. To them, the density of your energy gave you power. A fist packed with energy compressed to the limit could turn almost anything in the world into a fine powder, even if that target was a body with similarly compressed energy. In another moment, the stare-down ended. They both went on the move, kicking off a martial arts battle that defied imagination. A few moments earlier, it was all-out kaiju warfare. Now it was a more refined test of technique. Before long, however, it descended into an ugly brawl. Dagrel buried his fist in Veldora's stomach, just as Veldora's elbow smashed into Dagrel's face. One side would stage a blow, and the other would reciprocate. There weren't any rules to this contest, but they had now settled into this kind of back-and-forth exchange, like a pro wrestling match. The fight grew fiercer than ever, neither side giving an inch. A kick for a kick, a punch for a punch. Any attack thrown was greeted with a similar one in return. Neither fighter was digging their heels in, the battle was taking them all over the place. They'd go high up, then back down to the ground. They rolled over to the desert, blowing away everything around them, and then it was right back to the skies, even outside the planet's atmosphere at one point. To both of these fighters, little more than accumulated masses of pure energy, the location of the battlefield didn't matter. They didn't need any ground, no platform they could push off to gain momentum. Their own bodies were like cannonballs, smashing into their opponent with hyper-compressed force. Then, when one side was hit with that kind of force, they could vent the energy out from their bodies to keep it from being lethal. What mattered here was exhausting your opponent while using as little of your own energy as possible. They were exchanging blows that could easily destroy a high-level magic born in one hit, sending anything around them flying in the crossfire, not that they cared at all. The spectators were all holed up under their barriers, incapable of moving an inch. The fighters were no longer giant size, but the shock waves of energy alone were hard to comprehend, much less resist. Truly a fearsome sight, mused Luminous. The battle between Veldora and Dagrel was laying waste to the area around them. Luminous resented it, but she didn't see much alternative. It was a simple case of, well, what can you do? This was Dagrel, the god of destruction himself. It'd be asking way too much not to expect some collateral damage. Pillars of pure lightning dotted the landscape, burning anything they touched to a crisp. Layer upon layer of the protective barrier covering the holy city had already been rendered useless. The great wall that had protected that city over so many years was blown apart after the first collision between Dagrel and Veldora. It was almost breathtaking, how it couldn't hold out for even a single instant. If that wall was down, the monster exclusion barrier couldn't last much longer, either. It, too, had lost all functionality. The barrier had been built to withstand monsters up to a certain level, so there was no way it'd remain intact against things like a true dragon or a god of destruction. All that remained was the defensive barrier everyone had gathered together to build, with Xion leading them, and they were risking their lives to keep it going. But even with all that effort, it was almost strange how they were still alive. At this rate, the barrier would fall, they'd all instantly die, and the damage would extend to the central core of the city. Anyone could see that it was only a matter of time. It hadn't happened yet only because Veldora was doing whatever he could to avoid that. "Damn it, Veldora," said Luminous, realizing this fact. "He really has grown a little, hasn't he? He's protecting us, in his own way." "It's true," agreed Xion. "I'd expect nothing less from Sir Veldora." Her eyes were gleaming as she gave him this honest praise. "Yeah, it's pretty impressive. He's leading Dagrel around to ensure nothing directly hits us." Ultima's analysis was correct. Even Ghidorah had to offer his approval. "It's true, yes." She didn't want to admit it, but Luminous could no longer deny how great Veldora was. She even marveled at how he had the capacity to think about things like that during this awe-inspiring battle. Adalman and Alberto were both speechless, watching with bated breath as Veldora fought. Luminous, too, was watching events unfold above her head. It was a constant barrage of imponderably powerful skills beyond anything she could have imagined. Attempting to join this fray would be suicide, even for someone like her. She might have wanted to complain to them about it, but she had no way of getting that complaint across to them. All she could do was pin her hopes on Veldora, or really, on the heavens themselves. Of course, she didn't really have any complaints to lodge in the first place. In fact, she was just as enraptured by this fight as everyone else. It was a rough, unrefined contest, but it was also beautiful. They competed in both power and technique, as if trying to spur the other to yet greater heights. It was proven by how Veldora had considerably sharpened his technique since just after the battle broke out. Now it was getting even more frenetic. Xion, next to Luminous, was just as awed by the whole thing, and Luminous could see why. Having a mythological class fight like this was a precious asset, something that maybe happened once in a millennium. Merely watching the truly strong fight could provide you with vital experience. Seeing two utter superpowers like this go at it was something you almost never got to witness. Basara, who had joined the abject crowd at some point, couldn't help but appreciate it. "You know," he said, "since when did Veldora become such a good close-quarters fighter? I mean, my boss has 3 heads and 6 arms. That's so much more to work with." And yet the fight was even, unnaturally so. Basara, having just awoken from his banishment, wouldn't have known, but Luminous and Xion knew the reason. "Well," said Luminous, "he's been going around the labyrinth laying waste to everything he sees is why. Training, he calls it." "Not quite, Luminous. Sir Veldora is the one leading and guiding all the labyrinth's guardians. He has made a concerted daily effort to maintain his reputation as the final line against any intruders." Xion couldn't have sounded prouder as she refuted the sharp-tongued Luminous. "Labyrinth?" said Basara. "Ah yes, you wouldn't know about it. Inside the labyrinth created by Ramirez, there's a training ground where you can die and be revived an infinite number of times," Luminous explained. Basara groaned in wonder. "Huh? Oh, come on. That's just cheating." No one could refute that. Everyone, no matter which side they were on, found it pretty unfair. It was Veldora who leveraged that aspect of the labyrinths to the maximum possible level, too. He'd cause outrageous amounts of damage if he marauded like mad on the surface, but there was no worry in the labyrinth halls. Some of the levels had been taking damage as of late, but the training ground was still intact, so he had mostly been practicing in there with Zijin. That's what had made Veldora into a first-class martial artist. He had always been strong, but now he had true technique, making him an unstoppable menace. If Dagrel hadn't turned into Ashura, he absolutely would have been above him, and through his experience in this battle, Veldora was learning how to fight off a foe with lots of different moves to throw at him. It was making him literally untouchable. It was little wonder that everyone was awed by the sight. The battle was truly monumental in scale, and it didn't seem like it would ever end. But the final decision was near. From before the start of this martial arts contest, Veldora was hatching his plan. Victory, for him, had been promised all along. He had continually looked for his big chance. He had trained with Zijin and Ultima and all the other stout residents of the labyrinth. That, plus his experience fighting Vielgrind and Raimoru, had made him stronger than ever before. To him, close-quarters battle was now his preferred method of fighting. He had even learned how to fight less than fair when needed, with Raimoru being the perfect teacher for him. Like Sun Tzu said, every battle is won or lost before it is fought. Raimoru quoted that a lot whenever he lectured his team about the importance of preparedness. If you squared all of that away beforehand, you wouldn't need to panic about any eventuality. The hardest part of a war was always how to end it, so you needed to make sure any potential hazards were out of the way. Veldora made an on-the-spot decision to join this battle, so prepared was not exactly how best to describe him, although he did have a few secret moves up his sleeve. They could potentially be resisted by a foe whose energy outclassed his, but if that was no longer the case, they were basically guaranteed to work. So he steadily chipped away at Dagrel's stamina. Then he waited, gauging his own status and comparing it with his enemies. He only kept going with Dagrel after he was sure the time had come out of common courtesy to his old friend. "I thought I had mastered this, but I see I have far to go." Dagrel, who was planning to dominate Veldora, was shocked down to the core. He had transformed into Ashura, he broke out his greatest skill of all, and he still couldn't win. There was no longer any point pretending he was above his foe at all. Still, despite that, he felt he retained a slight advantage in martial combat. That, however, was also just him kidding himself. Here, at this point, Dagrel finally had to admit to that. "I think it's about time to pull out, Dagrel. If you give up and go back home, I will do nothing further to you." "Enough, Veldora. You know I can't do that. I have to defeat Luminous. It is the least I can offer to my late friend." Veldora nodded. He, too, understood what paying your respects to the dead meant. But despite that, he couldn't help but think that the living were more important. Rimuru described it as a case-by-case thing. It didn't matter who was right or not, it depended a lot more on people's feelings, and apparently, it wasn't the kind of thing a third party could casually decide on. So Veldora hesitated to judge Dagral for it, but he wasn't about to allow him to do whatever he wanted, either. Dagral might have his own motivations, but Veldora had good reason to not let him go. This world was all about survival of the fittest. The strongest got to set the rules, and he had already resolved that beating Dagral here was the best way to stop him. Well, Veldora began, it's too bad, Dagral. Allow me to end this with my final and most greatest of finishers. Dagral grew tense at the announcement. But it was too late for him. Veldora's skill was honed for this moment, and now he was champing at the bit to use it. The next instant, a rainbow of darkness blanketed their surroundings, swallowing up an area that completely covered both the holy empire of Lubelius and the deadly desert. Fertile paradox. The declaration was made. And amid that rainbow of darkness, a cruel miracle manifested itself. The rainbow was swallowing everything up, expanding so quickly that it would soon envelop the entire area. What is that? It was already too late by the time Luminous sensed the danger. She was unable to resist this rainbow of darkness as it penetrated their barrier. What is going on? She asked amid the confusion. Then, once the darkness reached her, she understood. This is paradoxical power. It was a power similar to prayer, a healing force, helping people heal and grow, the opposite of destruction. There was no way to resist it, it would never allow anything like that. Luminous was no exception, and in another moment, the darkness was all over her. This. How could he? Damn it. That lizard. How is anyone supposed to do anything about this? Then, as frustrated as she was, Luminous became engulfed in the rainbow of darkness. As did Shion. And Ultima, and Ghidorah, and Adalman, and Alberto, and all Dagral's sons, and Basara too. Them and everyone else from hero to buck private. All were driven to a deep sleep the moment the darkness reached them. There were no exceptions, and thus, as all life began to slumber, green buds began to sprout on the soil. Veldora stood within the dark rainbow. Before him was Dagral, the god of destruction, or what was left of him. Ashura had been deactivated by Veldora's skill, so Glazord and Fen were there as well. Glazord looked like he had just completed a great task, but Fen seemed nonplussed, pouting and turning his back to the others. Dagral, on the other hand, remained serene. Did you change the world? Using us as the seedlings? He asked Veldora. HMMPH. Change would be exaggerating it. But I did mess with it a little, yes. Dagral looked like he couldn't believe any of this, and Veldora was eager to answer him. The giant didn't appreciate his attitude very much, but he was too incapacitated to do anything about it. The seedling statement was more than an analogy. Dagral's arms and legs were now buried inside the trunk of a large tree, as were Fen's and Glazord's. It looked as if their upper bodies were growing from the tree, but their limbs were now fully absorbed into it. They had no way of freely moving around any longer, and it was impossible to get themselves out of this. What did you do? Dagral demanded. I suppose it'd be most accurate to say that I returned you to what you were. What? I took this world, teeming with out-of-control magicules, and brought it back to its original verdant state. Wait. Did you change the state of the magicules themselves? Magicules could be in one of several states. The hostile ones were used for attacks, but they could also be calmer and more stabilized. The deadly desert was in a state of constant ruin because these more aggressive magicules were running freely over its confines. If they could be stabilized, the whole region could turn into a lush wood, just like the forest of Jura. Dagral, however, couldn't do that. Neither could any of the other demon lords. Not even Luminous, usually an expert in paradoxical forces like these, was capable of quelling Milim's rampage. If she could, Maybe she and Dagrel could have come to an agreement long ago. The conventional wisdom dictated that changes in the state of magicules could not realistically be fixed by anyone, you simply had to wait for time to take care of it. But here was Veldora. Fertile paradox isn't an attack, technically speaking. I have simply applied my blessing to this land. It has reconciled the chaotic magicules, using those who trod upon nature as fuel to encourage the growth of new life. This was once the site of a magic-driven disaster, but now it'll go back to normal and become a fertile land anew. MMH. Dagrel groaned. There was no fabrication in what Veldora said. He stared blankly at him. Was that even possible? Yes, it must be. Dagrel gloomily thought that was what Veldora could do. And by the way, this is all running with your bodies as its core. It's using all the abundant energy inside of you, so you're as good as sealed away in there now. And since no one but me can undo this skill, I'd say your marauding days are over. There's no escaping fertile paradox, Veldora stated, laughing. He was confident of this, and not even the all-powerful Dagrel could shake him of that conviction. This skill, after all, was a blessing at its core, derived from nature-based healing. It simply restored life forms to their natural state, never forcing anything on its targets. There was no way to resist. Dagrel and his kin were evil gods, marauding gods of destruction. Now Veldora had restored a part of this planet that had been missing, the gods of nature who protected it. It was now impossible to escape by their own will. Now I know. You are fearsomely cunning, indeed. Qua ha ha ha. I will accept that as a compliment. Dagrel didn't mean it as one, but Veldora just laughed it off. Even Dagrel couldn't do much more than bitterly smile. But there's no need for you to worry. I'll release you once the overall war is over. You'll have recovered your holy force by then, and things ought to be completely back to normal around here. You and Luminous won't have any reason left to fight, will you? Rimuru would be tracked down, too. It wasn't likely to take any more than a few decades at worst. Dagrel would cease to be a viable threat then, so Veldora didn't see any reason to keep him confined beyond that time frame. This, too, surprised Dagrel. You're going to release me? No. More than that, you realized the state that my domain was in? He was shocked that Veldora's thoughts ran that deeply. Anyone who knew the old Veldora would be just as astounded. Dagrel and Luminous could probably spend the entire night talking about it. I sense a little hostility around me, but fine, said Veldora. Your nation was going to run out of water in a few more centuries regardless. As stout as the giants are, not even they would have been able to stay here. Right? It was too accurate an assessment, Dagrel had to agree with him. Veldora was much more thoughtful than before. So you did notice. You saw the true reason why I sent the bound titans on the march for Luminous's domain. Losing to Fen had reminded Dagrel of his past, more violent self, but his core essence hadn't changed at all. It may have looked like he turned traitor against Rimuru's force, but he had what he felt was ample justification for that. He was the king of his people, and he coldly reasoned what had to be done to weather this storm. Veldora knew all that, and it made Dagrel feel supremely awkward now. Nah, Veldora blithely replied. I didn't know about any of that. It's none of my business anyway. The fact that your force was composed strictly of the undead with no young soldiers or women, that wasn't any concern of mine, either. Heh. Ha 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 ha. Playing dumb, huh? That's just like you, Veldora. Now Dagrel was heartily laughing. Once again, just as before, he was Veldora's friend. Dagrel, defeated once by Veldenava in the past, had been assigned the role of guarding Skyspire Tower, the gateway to the Celestial Palace. The giants he led stayed faithful to that order, but then Milim went berserk on them, and there was nothing they could do to punish her for it. He didn't have it in him to hate anyone, so Dagrel quietly followed his divine orders, all but agreeing to die with his land. But when Fen beat him, the experience jogged his memories of the past. It rejuvenated his mettle, and he decided to place one final bet on his fortunes. Luminous was the perfect scapegoat for him. If he could take her on and seize her domain, there was hope that the giants would survive after all. Even if they were defeated, if their numbers were suitably culled, the survivors would have a little extra time to hold out. Either way, taking action presented new possibilities. So even if it branded him a traitor, he decided to play along with Fen. If only I would fall, then so be it, said Dagrel. But as a king, I couldn't bear to doom the younger residents of my domain to the same fate. It was hard luck for Luminous, but I saw it as a golden opportunity. Dagrel was in full confession mode. Veldora only shrugged. No one will chide you for that. Survival of the fittest, that's what makes the world go round. That, too, was the supreme truth. People might want to complain about it, but nobody was there to hear them. They were unlikely to survive this great war. Without Veldora intervening, there was no way for Luminous's forces to avoid defeat. Whoever won was on the side of justice. Dagrel was just unlucky this time. But, Veldora. Why? Why did you revive this land? In order to save us? Out of sympathy? As Dagrel could see, the bare desert, once infused with magicules gone mad, was rapidly turning into a land of green. It was expanding before their eyes, and even now it was starting to do its work on the giant's domain. Qua ha 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 ha. Don't read me wrong now. All I wanted was to prove I'm stronger than you. That, and I wanted to show off a little so Luminous would stop hating me so much, and this seemed like the perfect way. With the magicules now in harmony, crops could grow far better than before. This phenomenon was powerful enough to reform the desert itself. It was bound to work out. But there was no way that could be the only reason. Stop playing with me, said Dagrel. I am not playing one bit. I never thought its effects would extend into the deadly desert, is all. A miscalculation. That was the story Veldora stuck with. It made Dagrel smile. Heh heh. Ha 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 ha. Playing dumb to the end, eh? All right. Don't expect me to repay you, Veldora. Of course not. We are friends, and friends should never owe each other favors. We will fight again someday, trust me. And I'll win, of course. Oh, sure, go on like that. I'm not enough of a wimp to lose to a kid like you twice. Veldora and Dagrel shared a laugh with each other. There were no hard feelings any longer. The refreshed looks on their faces told the whole story. Dagrel was no longer a threat to anyone present, but then an unexpected intruder showed up, pushing through the dark rainbow like it was nothing and appearing inside this unique space. It was Veilgrind, a blue-haired, heart-stopping beauty and an ominous figure in Veldora's mind. Looks like you've settled things here, she told Veldora. In that case, we need to talk about the next thorny problem. Jiga. My sister? You don't have to act so shocked to see me every single time. Anyway, it's about Milim. She attacked Skyspire Tower. Huh? Said Dagrel. What did you say, my sister? The bare facts, laid out by Veilgrind, came as a shock to everyone else. It was a particularly painful blow to Dagrel. Next to Skyspire Tower was an underground city that the rest of the giants had evacuated into. Most of them were children, the future standard-bearers for their people. There was no way they could defend themselves against something as awful as an attack on the tower. Don't lie to me, Veilgrind. But Fen was the most agitated. Feldway hadn't breathed a word of this when he described his plan to him. It's the truth, a peeved-looking Veilgrind spat. Why? Countered Fen. I thought we weren't going to touch that place. So? There was no talk about not touching that place. Feldway just never said that he would. He kept silent about it, not seeing any need to make this new recruit suspect him. Well, don't ask me, said Veilgrind. You'd know more about what's going on in Feldway's mind than I ever would, goddamn you. Oh, will you just quit already, you idiot? You knew Feldway wanted to destroy the Divine Tree, right? You should have anticipated that Skyspire Tower would get in the way of that effort. Why didn't you? Fen didn't have much of a way to counter that. Only a small handful of people were forward-thinking enough to consider the idea, but saying that wouldn't help his case much. Veelgrind, for one, certainly came to that conclusion. It was why she protected the people of the Holy Void of Damargania, even helping Ci evacuate its people to safety. That was the only reason there were no casualties yet. Skyspire's outer walls were an even match against Milim's Drago Nova, so I used my star barrier to reinforce them a bit. They held out, Veelgrind explained. The news came as a great relief to Dagral and his men. So, you saved them? Dagral asked. I suppose so. I owed Raimuru a favor, and I'd like to think I just paid it back with interest. But more to the point, I'm pretty sure the gate has been destroyed, and thanks to that, we'll have a disaster on our hands soon. You mean Evalage the world's destroyer dragon? Oh. So we really were just a distraction all along. Without Dagral and his forces guarding Skyspire Tower, it would have happened all too easily. Fen might have seen Feldway as his compatriot, but even he had to admit to the truth. Now he couldn't blame Veelgrind for calling him a fool. So why did you come here to tell us? He asked. Veelgrind flashed him a cold look. I don't have any business with you. I wanted to discuss this crisis with Luminous. Her and my stupid brother over there. Me? Veldora sounded terribly aggrieved by this, but he was ignored. So once this darkness goes away, you're going over to the Divine Tree. Wait, what? Veldora balked. Yes, the Divine Tree. Feldway probably wants Milim to destroy it. Feldway had failed at it once, but he hadn't given up yet. Now that he had regained full control over Milim, he had no reason to sit idle. And that was the thorny problem Veelgrind had in mind. Milim and her group were on their way to their next destination. He really does want to destroy this planet, doesn't he? I'm sure he does. I'll stop him, of course, but... She knew just how tough it'd be, but she still boldly smiled. If she timidly wailed over it right now, it wouldn't improve matters at all. She was just going to struggle until the end, and that was that. It was a move she'd learned fighting Raimuru and his allies. What are you gonna do, Luminous? Asked Veldora. I will accept any refugees. The Holy Void of Damargania will be the front line of this conflict. They'll all be wiped out if we don't evacuate them. It was an extremely valid opinion. Everyone was convinced of it at once, and Dagral and the giants thanked her from the bottom of their hearts. The rainbow of darkness dissipated. They were back in their original wasteland, spread out next to what once was the deadly desert. Now it had transformed into a vast land of green, with plants growing at a dizzying pace and creating fertile lands wherever they were. The effects of fertile paradox spread far and wide, turning this land into a vast forest even Jura would be jealous of in the blink of an eye. On the other hand, the holy city was facing serious problems. These same plants, perhaps feeding on the magicules in the area, were now burying the buildings in greenery as well. The land was filled with things like wood fences and stone foundations that used magicule-infused materials, and of course they were going to be affected by Veldora's skill. Maybe I got a little too carried away, kind of. Veldora wondered aloud. It was a little too late for such regrets. The transformation had gone beyond even what Veldora expected. Now there was no way for him to avoid Luminous's rage, and in fact, Luminous, who had just woken up, had the most darling smile on her face. She stomped her way toward the increasingly nervous-looking Veldora. So, Veldora, would you mind explaining all this to me? She asked. There was a clear, visibly throbbing blue vein on her forehead, underneath her silver hair. Her lips were smiling, but her eyes certainly weren't. Veldora was quickly gripped by the feeling that he was in serious danger. You're kidding me. This was the perfect plan. It was supposed to restore my good name for all time. He thought. He had saved Luminous from danger and turned both her and Dagral's domain into a bountiful paradise, truly the perfect strategy. Unfortunately, That plan now seemed to be going in a truly ominous direction. Even worse, Veelgrind was right behind him. This was exactly what being between a rock and a hard place meant. At this rate, all Veldora could do was remain defiant. "No, Luminous. I have a perfectly reasonable explanation for everything. I'd love to lay it all out for you, but I'm busy, so we'll need to talk later. Now farewell." And so he soared into the air, flying away at a speed faster than any he had accomplished fighting Dagrel. "Ugh! That bastard ran off on us again." Luminous sounded miffed, but she had no intention of chasing Veldora. Veelgrind had been there since the moment Luminous woke up, so the Demon Lord knew something terrible must have happened. Her rest was nowhere near as long as she needed, but she had to have missed a lot. She looked at Dagrel and his brothers, who now seemed to be growing out from a large tree of some sort. "So what is going on?" she asked Veelgrind. "The world's in danger. Can we do anything about that?" Veelgrind shrugged. "We're gonna have to." She now regretted not doing more to keep Rimuru from being banished, but regardless, it was too dangerous to intervene back there without a plan. Even if she did, it would have just immediately vaporized her separate body. Staying hidden and protecting Dagrel's people was the best choice to make back there. And besides, thought Veelgrind, I knew Rimuru could work it out. Even against Chrono-Saltation. That was her honest assessment. If Veelgrind herself could make it back out, she felt that Rimuru could as well. She didn't have any concrete basis for that, but she was willing to believe in it. Thus, instead of worrying about Rimuru, she decided that doing what she could right now was a far better idea. She explained to Luminous what was going on. Being an intelligent ruler, Luminous immediately appreciated the danger. I see, she mused. "In that case, I will accept any refugees, by all means." "Thank you," Dagrel said, heaving a relieved sigh. He wasn't able to move, but he could still converse with everyone, and this was how he and Luminous finally brokered peace with each other. That being said, while they had successfully defended this domain, the city borders were in a sorry state. Even within the city, trees and plants were growing wild, cutting off entire streets and causing mayhem all over the place. Fixing all this would take a Herculean effort, but Luminous had no intention of suing Dagrel's side for damages. No, this was the sort of victory where the winners should just celebrate the fact they're still around. It may not have seemed like much, but it was important. Stay alive, and you could always work something out later. Luminous was frankly outraged by the damage, but the danger facing the whole world right now took priority. She felt repairing the city could wait until all these other difficulties were behind them. For now, it was time to turn the page, and she presumed that Rimuru would be all too eager to help out with the rebuilding. Veelgrind had told Luminous the whole story behind Rimuru's disappearance, but she honestly wasn't too worried about it. She knew what kind of person Rimuru was, because she had been carefully observing him this whole time. A slime like him wasn't about to go down that easily. So instead of devoting excessive concern to him, she decided to think about the future. "The next question is how we'll guide the refugees here," said Luminous. "I think you can leave that to me," Veelgrind replied. Veelgrind instantly created a spatial connection linking this land with theirs. The separate body she had standing by on the opposite side began guiding the giants through it. The migration was underway. "You see?" She gently smiled. "Nothing to panic about." Her smile was laden with merciful love, but she wasn't feeling all that unhurried right now. Already, she could sense an ominous presence oozing from Skyspire Tower. Not good. I can even detect Divalage over there. We'll need to build a full defensive line or else the whole world could be destroyed in an instant. Fortunately, they seemed to have ample time before Divalage showed up. However, the cryptids were likely to be the vanguard force, and these wouldn't be the small fry that traveled through that time rift in the past. The aura of destruction she sensed was intensifying by the moment. Each one of them was at least a disaster-level threat, nothing a normal human being could handle. All the world's champions would have to come together, or else it'd be far too difficult to overcome this danger, a fact Vielgrind prudently decided not to tell the refugees. These refugees were led through by Louis, making full use of his status as a religious leader to urge calm among the crowds. The local citizens weren't much better off than the refugees right now. Many of them were now homeless, and they had all fled into the cathedral for shelter. Only so many people could fit in one place, so they were splitting them all up, guiding them to underground shelters, the inns and churches that dotted their holy mountains, and so on. Meanwhile, the leaders were all holding a strategy meeting, with Dagrel and his brothers in the tree also participating. Vielgrind was leading this conference, and Luminous, Gunther, Ultima, Shion, and Dagrel's sons were in attendance, along with Adalman, Ghidorah, Alberto, and 4-armed Basara. "We'll need to stop the cryptids before they take off and fly across the land," said Dagrel to the agreement of everyone on hand. "Your inability to guard that gate is putting us at a serious disadvantage." Luminous's remark indicated that she still wasn't in a particularly good mood. "I'm sorry." Dagrel bowed his head. He couldn't do much else. "It's exactly why I had so much trouble, too," retorted Ultima. Dagrel wasn't sure how to respond to that. He knew that his actions had made things a lot worse for them all. From an impartial perspective, that epic battle just now was a complete waste of time and resources, triggered by Dagrel getting duped by his brother. All he could do now was submit to their complaints. The true dragon, on the other hand, couldn't care less. "Can we drop the little details for now, Luminous?" Vielgrind asked. These were far from little details, but from Vielgrind's perspective, the destruction of a city was no great shakes. "They resemble each other in that way as well," noted Luminous. "Like brother, like sister, I suppose." If she brought it up, though, it'd just agitate Vielgrind and make Veldora scowl at her. Either way, they needed to figure out their future direction. "As I think you're aware, once Ivalid shows up, it'll be on us to engage it. If we have to protect the entire rest of the planet as we do, it'll be hard for us to exercise our full effort on that dragon." Vielgrind was stating the cold, inconvenient facts. Those who didn't know the threat the world destroyer dragon posed probably didn't know what this meant, but not Luminous. "So Veldora is going to the Divine Tree?" she asked. Feldway's mission wasn't likely to end with the destruction of that tree. The summoning of Ivalij was part of his plans as well. He wanted to destroy this whole world and reset it back to square one. "So all that was a lie from the start," said Fen. Between destroying the gate and trying to destroy the Divine Tree, there was just one thing Feldway could be aiming for. He had no intention of respecting anyone else's territory from the get-go, or really, he had no reason to. If this planet was wiped out, all territorial disputes would cease to matter. Reminded of this anew, Fen hung his head low. "Again, will you stop bringing up inconsequential pieces of trivia, please?" Vielgrind interrupted him once more. It was almost surprising how little she cared about the giant leader's problems. It made Luminous smile a bit. "Regardless of what happens with Ivalij, we will need to do something about those cryptids," Luminous remarked, "but taking along a massive force would simply result in countless unnecessary deaths." Basara nodded, eager to join in this effort. "I agree with you, yeah. If we're gonna do it, then it'll have to be with only our best." No one disagreed with that, but realistically speaking, it presented a major problem, one Adalman was the first to point out. "But don't you think we're lacking in war power? There were only 11 people here healthy enough to act. Even if you added Louis and some of the more famed generals to the mix, you were talking 4 out of Basara's 5 great warlords and the full roster of the 7 great nobles." Vielgrind also needed to be taken out of the force, since she had other roles preoccupying her. They couldn't even afford to put their full manpower into this. Picking who'd participate in this effort would be a problem. Fortunately, all the fatigue from the previous battle was taken care of. Veldora's fertile paradox had fully healed everyone here, an impossible miracle, but everything about this was already so far-fetched, they all accepted it as normal by comparison. So the 11 members here were ready for battle. Anyone who fled would have nothing but death awaiting them. They were better off struggling to the bitter end. That was the resolve being shown here. Everyone was ready to risk their lives. Veelgrind nodded at them. I explained the situation to Masayuki over in English, and he said that Hinata Sakaguchi will join us as well. Masayuki himself had volunteered to fight. Veelgrind tried to stop him, calling it too dangerous. It'd be one thing if he manifested Ludora again, but if it was just young Masayuki himself, it'd be a one-way trip to the grave. She tried to convince him as much, but apparently it didn't work. Masayuki's mere presence brought fortune to his companions. Even if he lacked the power to fight, he could prove more useful than anyone else on the team. If Lubelius were to fall, Inglesia would be next, and then the flames of destruction would reach the Western nations. Someone as good-natured as Masayuki couldn't just sit there and wait for that future to happen, so now the hero was joining the fray. Their core members were now decided, but the problems hadn't been solved yet. In fact, they were still piling up. The meeting continued with some new members. Hinata and Masayuki had now joined in, while Dagrel and his family were out. They had moved to an open meeting hall, a more suitable place for healthy debate. The conclusion they had come to was that even a defensive force consisting of their hand-picked elites simply wouldn't provide enough firepower. They had too small of a team to handle the enemy force Veelgrind anticipated. Their team needed to be ranked A or higher and geared for mobility. In other words, they had to be able to defend themselves with no outside help. The cryptids are highly capable of regenerating their bodies, so exhausting them is a difficult task, but their offense isn't that strong in general. Once you learn the right tricks, I think you'll find it possible to deal with them. That was Veelgrind's assessment, but as a supreme being, she wasn't the right person to pass judgment about this. Whittling down the enemy's stamina would be a near impossible task, and any attack that hit an ally dead on would kill them. Even a scratch could mean a serious injury. Each one of the enemies was a Charybdis-level threat by themselves, and they had real cunning, too. They could even gang up during warfare if required to. If the estimates were correct, they'd have over 1,000 of these monsters surging toward them. No matter how optimistic you were, this was clearly a world-level threat. They couldn't do what Obila and the rest of Milim's Big Four could, namely, set a trap, surround them, and start pummeling. If any of their allies should fall, there'd be no time to rescue them. Based on all that, they were more or less forced to bring only the strongest among them to battle. I contacted Caligulio, Veelgrind said. Minutes should be coming, too. I took my separate bodies in the Empire back, which will weaken its defenses a fair amount, but it beats losing the whole world. Masayuki, who joined this meeting with Hinata, nodded. That's great to hear. I hate how I'm just being protected all the time, but I don't think any enemy attacks will reach me anyway, so it'll probably work out fine. Lately, Masayuki had grown pretty accepting of his lot in life. He had given up on mastering his control over Lord of Heroes, the ultimate skill he was supposedly in possession of, and now he was taking a whatever happens approach to living. He had noticed some time ago that leaving everything to luck usually led to better results in the end. Usually, he tried to make it look like he was putting forth a concerted effort, at least, but now was no time act cool. His volunteering for this war, too, wasn't the work of heroic altruism. If I do nothing, that's it for the world, isn't it? It's not gonna be much fun if I'm the only survivor. No, I got a bet on the off chance that everyone can survive this. It was, perhaps, a half-hearted sort of motivation, but it had brought him here anyway. It was true, though, his mere presence did a lot to make people feel a little bolder. Maybe he wasn't brimming with enthusiasm, but his actual actions proved he was every bit the hero he pretended to be. Hinata was present as well, leaving the Western nations behind and gallantly appearing in the face of danger. She had resisted taking action upon being told of Dagrel's advance, but things were different now. After all, Rimuru was missing. There's no way I'll ever believe he was defeated. He was always so chill and easy-breezy, no matter what happened. Like Masayaki, his mere presence had a reassuring effect on people around him. But from now on, the lazy hope that he'd figure something out could no longer be relied upon. It was up to Hinata herself to get moving. "I have taken along my greatest elites," she began, her expression harsh, leaving only a minimal defense force behind in each of the Western nations. "If we can't rely on Rimuru, we'll just have to muddle through this ourselves. If we can't keep this place safe for when he comes back, you know he's gonna mouth off about it." She was more frigid than ever, practically freezing the air around her. Losing Rimuru put her on edge. It was enough to remind those who knew her long enough of the days of old, when she acted like a goddess of ice to everyone around her. Well, who can blame her? Thought Luminous. Luminous knew better than to point it out. She'd realized a number of times since Rimuru's disappearance just how excessively they were relying on him for everything. But there was no point wailing about it. It was decided at this point that the main gist of this meeting should be narrowed down to one topic: should they inform the world at large about this mortal danger? They already feared they were lacking in strength, so inviting qualified warriors from across all nations seemed like a must. "I understand that self-defense must remain a priority for any nation," Luminous stated, "but it will mean precious little if this ends up destroying the world. Frankly, I do not care terribly much about what fate befalls the human race. I value those I have sworn to protect, but anyone who refuses to pay their respects to me, well, I will not be too bothered if we lose some number of them. They'll be multiplying all over again before very long, after all." They likely would be, yes. But this was a much different sort of danger. This calamity, presumably traveling in through Sky-Spire Tower, was the natural-born enemy of every life form on this planet. Let it go unchecked, and there was no guarantee anyone would survive to tell the tale. That, Luminous said, was why they had to protect this land, the one they were on right now. What happened to other human societies had to play second fiddle. They must focus on the front lines, the root of all this evil, and throw all their war power at it. However, there was no room in this war power for the weak. Anyone included in that descriptor would be left to figure out how to survive for themselves. Clearly, Luminous was putting her own motivations ahead of what was best for mankind at large, but no one was interested in a debate with her. Clinging to lofty fairy tale ideals wasn't going to get them anywhere, a fact everyone on hand understood. There would be winners and losers in this conflict, but it was up to them to figure out who'd get first priority and who'd be left in the lurch. "So what exactly do you intend to do?" Hinata asked Luminous. "I suppose we'll have to be honest and tell the world's nations." Luminous believed that a danger as unprecedented as this necessitated such an advance notice. There wasn't universal agreement on this. Wouldn't it just spread fear, one person pointed out, and make it impossible to maintain order? But Luminous wasn't swayed by her detractors. "I don't see why that matters," she said. "Those who choose not to believe in us are free to take whatever action they see fit instead." It was a near irrational line of argument, but it was the only correct one to make. They simply couldn't protect everyone, so there was no point getting upset over it. Luminous would have preferred if the rest of the world could just sit tight and wait for her. This was what the assembled guardians truly felt. And yes, the fear and anxiety that'd follow the news could lead to rioting. They were fully aware of that, but to be brutally honest, they couldn't devote what precious few resources they had to dealing with that. "That being said," continued Luminous, "we will only be taking champions above a certain level of ability, so the rest of them can help unite the people behind us. I doubt it'll be easy, but that's what we'll have to ask of them." With Hinata's voiced agreement, Luminous's suggestion was adopted. They decided Luminous would hold a speech addressed to the entire world, but there was hardly any time to organize that. Normally, a move like this, termed a revelation when it came from the divine Luminous, was carried out solemnly, with advance notice provided to all relevant nations and ample preparations made. This time, however, they'd just go and do it, without any grandiose setup like that. So, with absolutely no warning, the image of Luminous was suddenly floating in the skies of the principal nations of the world. It was a simultaneous world broadcast, and it shocked everyone who looked up at it, but Luminous didn't appear at all concerned about that as she began to speak. Listen to me. This is Luminous Valentine speaking, God, Demon Lord, and leader of Lubelius. This introduction of hers was impactful, to say the least. She revealed everything right off the bat. It was enough to make Luminous's underlings shake their heads. She was talking to a crowd of firm believers. Why was she deliberately making them doubt their faith in her? I will keep this brief, as there is no time for formality. The entire world is under threat from an unprecedented danger. By name as the God of my nation, I solemnly swear to devote everything I have to protecting my people. Furthermore, by my pride as a member of the Octagram, I swear to you that I will neither retreat nor give any ground as I fight this menace, just as all the other demon lords will. She wasn't sugarcoating it one bit. There was violence behind every word, making her onlookers wonder if she was deliberately trying to spark a riot. But instead, the people remained calm at large, precisely because they were about to descend into the worst kind of chaos. The mesmerizing beauty floating in the air didn't seem to be lying to them at all. Her appearance truly was godlike, and that alone was enough to charm people over to her side. No one doubted a word of what she said. Of course, running is pointless against this. We are talking about a threat that could destroy the entire world in time, so fighting is our only option. I will stake my pride as a demon lord on standing my ground, never turning my back to the enemy. And I am not alone. The image switched over to display a number of people in succession. First, it was the demon lord Luminous. Then Ultima, the primal demon. Then Hinata, the saint. Then Masayaki, the hero, and finally Veilgrind, the true dragon. These are my companions who will dare to face this mortal danger with me. Seeing this, the populace at large shared the same thought. This is totally in the bag, isn't it? The residents of Inglesia, in particular, swooned at the gallant sight of Masayaki, his preeminent attractiveness clear for all to see. Some viewers even considered traveling to the site of battle so they could see him in action. To those aware of how dangerous the true dragons were, Veilgrind's name held great sway as well. She was an unshakable presence, the fearsome empress not even Veldora dared to cross. Then there was Ultima, whose sheer cuteness was earning her a rapidly growing fan base worldwide. They were all fools tricked by how she looked, but that was partly Ultima's fault for striking all those cute poses for the camera. Add to that crew both Hinata and the god of luminism herself, and the natural reaction for most was along the lines of how would we possibly lose this? However, continued Luminous, not aware of this, we still need more numbers. Therefore, I send out an invitation to all brave, gallant champions out there, come to us, for you will find no future for yourselves if you flee. If you fail to take action and instead survive on the backs of all the champions who may die for you, then you will never be able to live proudly for the rest of your lives. Yes, now is the time to prove your courage. Now Luminous's speech was starting to have an unexpected effect. Some onlookers were enraptured by her bewitching beauty. Some had just become lifelong fans of Ultima. Some were left quivering at the fetching sight of Hinata. Some cheered loudly at the smug grin of Masayaki, and some revered the otherworldly visage of Veilgrind. Broadcasting this video to the world was, in a way, a brilliant move to make. There was concern at first that it'd throw the people into despair, but the sheer divinity of this performance was giving them hope instead. It felt like the end times, but here they were, gathered together like they were recreating the divine myths of old. Seeing this unfold created a swirling maelstrom of excitement. This was, well, a tad befuddling to those who knew the full nature of what was to come. But to the general public, seeing all these big names join hands against a common enemy was the most energizing experience they'd had in ages. The speech was now nearing its climax. Leaders of the world, listen closely to me. You may enjoy your lofty positions, but you serve your people, not the other way around. You are nobility, kings even, because you live proudly and hold your head high. Fleeing will not be allowed. No, you must unite your people and rule over them correctly, so we may all face this mortal danger together. And to the unenlightened masses, I advise you that remaining unenlightened is perfectly all right. Your job is simply to live. Cling to life with all your might, and do not get in our way. Finally, to the strong and the powerful, I offer you a truly attractive place to die. I invite you to dedicate your lives to us, so we may all grasp victory in the end. It was the most important speech of Luminous's life, one that would be recorded and discussed for generations, and when all is said and done, let us all shout together, victory to us. Victory to our planet. All evil must be eliminated so victory may be gained. All human intelligence, power, and courage must be gathered together so they can be harnessed for this utmost of priorities. That was the message she had, and the people of the world answered it. Seeing the determination of Luminous and her champions, everyone was instantly resolved to this noble effort. Yeah! Victory to us. Victory to our planet. The cheers and roars could be heard across the world. It was sheer passion at work. One should never underestimate Luminous's charisma like that. She wasn't tapping into any particular skill, but all at once, the human race was united, as if caught up in her spell. This speech would come to be known by later generations as the final declaration, and before anyone's passions had settled down, all the nations of the world began to hold emergency meetings, debating with what little time they had left. One by one, they agreed to send as many resources as they could to the front as reinforcements, leaving only the bare minimum behind. As those inspired by Luminous's speech began to gather for the cause, Dagrel was holding a speech of his own, addressing the surviving members of the bound Titans. His sons were in attendance as well, all three of them lined up in front. Hear my words. I am incapacitated for now, and so I name Dagra as your interim commander. Liura, Chonkra, I order you to aid Dagra in his duties and strive to bring glory and prosperity to all giants. Yes, father. Sure thing, Dad. Dagrel gave them both a firm nod. Now, my giant warriors, please forgive me for my foolish deeds. From now on, I bid you to treat Dagra as you would myself and to follow all his orders to the letter. A flurry of cheers erupted, the entire audience voicing their yes at this request. He might only be interim leader until Dagrel could move again, but Dagra, his eldest son, was hardly an unpopular figure, either. Don't worry, man, said four-armed Basara as he slapped Dagra on the back. You got me right here, and I'll protect you all, no matter what. As Dagra's uncle, he was ready to provide whatever support he needed, which tremendously relieved Dagrel. At long last, he could smile again. Luminous and I have yet to settle our disagreements, but this time, she has done me a favor I could hardly repay her for. I will lock up all our previous grudges inside of me and prepare for the future to come, said Dagrel. Thanks to Veldora, their land was going to be revived. The age would come when territorial expansion was no longer a top priority, and so they no longer had a reason to battle Luminous. Luckily, only a small number of them died in battle this time. The ones who were near mortally injured on both sides were immediately healed by fertile paradox and back at their posts. This miracle, too, played no small role in the lack of enmity between the two sides. For now, they had to look toward the future, a vision Dagrel shared with his sons. Dagra, you will become our king someday. Instead of following my opinion, you must start to decide on matters and figure out what is right and wrong for yourself. In your hands is held the fate of the entire giant race. You do well to remember that, and both of you, too. Fleeing was not an option, a fact Dagrel wanted Dagra, Liura, and Chonkra to be sure about. It unnerved his three sons a little. Yes, father, replied Dagra. That goes without saying. I will wager my very life on carrying out my role as the king's proxy. And I'll help him, added Liura. I promise I'll live up to your expectations, father. Yeah, for sure, Dad, said Chonkra. Dagrel would not accept hesitation on this topic, and there was no way his sons would dare to defy him. All three of them made their promises, awed by their father's oppression. And then, We swear to pray for Sir Dagrel's return and follow Sir Dagra's orders for the sake of our country. The elite members of the Bound Titans, fully aware of Dagrel's defeat, Veldora's rescue, and Luminous's kindness, all avowed their agreement with Dagrel's decision. Their king gave them a satisfied nod. I regret the fact that I cannot watch this war for myself, but there is little time left to work with. We will now go to sleep, firmly believing that we have a future waiting for us. The rest is in your hands, Dagra. For now, farewell. With those final words, Dagrel and his brothers were absorbed into the great tree. They would go to sleep so that they could revive both this land and their own physical bodies. Dagrel's rebellion was settled, and the Bound Titans were going to participate in the final battle. Mighty forces were now gathering across the continent. Those who wouldn't make it to the defense lines in time weren't counted on from the start. If they made it there, that proved they were already one-man armies. One major surprise to see here was the 500 Pegasus Knights, led by the champion Gazelle Dwago himself. If that's how she's going to phrase it, he said with a chuckle, I can hardly stay preoccupied with only my kingdom's matters, but despite his complaints, his eyes held a sincere drive. As his former training partner, he saw himself as responsible for guarding the fort while Rimuru was gone, a duty that motivated him to no end. Hinata, meanwhile, was leading a team of 300 crusaders. You must stake your very lives on keeping the lines defended. If you die, Luminous will revive you anyway, she told them. The order was beyond reckless, venturing into impossible territory, but it was gleefully accepted by her troops. They were all paladins with an over A rating, and they had no fear of death whatsoever, a trait that was as eerie as it was reassuring to those around them. Louis, leader of the vampires, captained the Bloody Knights group that numbered a bit under 400. Their holy robes certainly drew attention, so they served as the most conspicuous members of this army. From the Empire, meanwhile, came a troop from the reformed Imperial Guardians, with Caligulio as commander and Minutes as his aide-de-camp. They were to serve as an iron wall protecting Masayuki. The main force, however, would be the 1,000 elite warriors selected from among the Bound Titans. Dagra, as interim king, was their commander, but Basara was also by his side, ensuring that everything went smoothly. They would be reinforced by a group of 500 champions assembled from around the world. The new monarch Yom was cited among their ranks, as well as Queen Mjafarminus, the former Mjurin, Gruasith, and even Rosin. 2 of the 3 battle sages, Sare and Grigori, would temporarily go back into action for this effort, fighting alongside 30 members of the Master Rooks. Sare was afraid to so much as make eye contact with Hinata, but at least he didn't flee, indicating that he grew at least a bit of a backbone in the meantime. This ragtag group of champions weren't much of an ordered fighting squadron, so they'd form smaller mobile units, the ranks of each team filled by those who were friendly with or otherwise knew one another. A hierarchy quickly made itself known among these teams, which made sense given how the more famous champions were generally the most powerful ones as well. So, despite how hurried the effort was, they now had a defensive force comprised of the greatest elites the world had to offer. Their total numbers were just under 3,000, all of them ranking on the upper end of an A, the most powerful fighting force one could think of. Luminous, observing the force as they fully surrounded Skyspire Tower, couldn't help but feel deeply moved. An impressive sight, but who knows how many of them will survive? She wondered aloud. Which of these champions lived and which died were none of Luminous's business, but she still thought about them, because within each of them was the shining glow of a soul that was true. Standing next to Luminous was Shion, fully recovered and bursting with energy. When she woke up after Veldora's fertile paradox, she was still in an incomplete state. Her magicule count had skyrocketed so high that not even that crazy skill completely healed her. It's not a problem, though. I'm not going to let this body die on me, said Shion. Luminous wondered what possible basis she might have had for saying that. This was Shion, so there was likely no basis at all, it was just pure hope talking. It had to turn out that way or else, a blunt way to express how she felt inside. Luminous liked that aspect of her. Pessimism wasn't going to help anyone. In Luminus's eyes, it was better to die with hope for the future than with despair in your heart. But Shion and Adalman's conversation concerned her a little. That's right. We'll use the Immortal Legion as a ruse to. That's not going to be possible. Why not? Well, you see, I seem to have taken possession of a physical body. Luminus glared at Adalman. He was right. She knew that he had merged with Venti during the fight against Fen, and she assumed he was still in that mode, but apparently not. The miniature dragon on Adalman's shoulder was Venti in her own transformed state, and that meant one thing: Adalman had finally graduated from skeleton Dom, at least in his default state, and not just him, either. Apparently, this applied to all members of the Immortal Legion. It had something to do with Valdora's fertile paradox. The skill saw being undead as a status ailment of sorts, so it removed that attribute from all of them. Is that, even possible? A disinterested Ultima asked, and if even a primal demon was caught off guard by this turn of events, it had to be something really weird. No longer being undead was great news for all of them, probably. But if they no longer cleared an A in rank, they wouldn't be useful in this battle. They'd now have to work in the rear guard, guiding the citizens and giants to their shelters and maintaining supply lines and such. Only a short time remained before battle kicked off, and preparations were now rapidly underway. Interlude. King of the Insects. Xeranus was nursing his wounds. Not the ones he incurred in the fight against Milim, the side effects from being forcibly subjected to reconstruct life. Period's death was wholly unexpected, throwing his plans slightly out of whack, but it wound up not being a major issue. As far as Xeranus was concerned, even that tragedy merited nothing but a slight rearrangement of his original schedule. All insectors were designed to belong to Xeranus. They had been birthed that way, from Period on down, and when she died, her power merely went back to Xeranus. It was supposed to revert to Period, so she'd eventually become a super being, but instead all that power went straight to Xeranus. To someone like him, who didn't mind consuming even himself with Devastator virus, it was no great change at all. He was just raising his own kin, like a farmer tending to his fields, and then he'd live off them. The better he was at raising them, the more powerful he became. Knowledge, power, experience, all of it became Xeranus's possession. That was the true nature of Sephiroth, Lord of Life, his ultimate skill. It was true that he anticipated Szeth would become more powerful than his parents over time, but now Xeranus was certain that was impossible. If it ever happened, he was prepared to turn Sephiroth over to him, except it was doomed never to occur. Szeth was dead, too, more grist for the mill. The moment arrived too early, but it looked like he had matured enough. Xeranus was satisfied. The power surged within him. For the first time in ages, he felt terrific, as if all his old abilities were back. He was several dozen times stronger than he'd been at birth. Even compared to when he fought Milim, he was overwhelmingly more powerful now. His existence points were well over 100 million, making him a supernatural presence that surpassed even a true dragon. Yet it wasn't enough. Some of Xeranus's kin were still alive, exulting in the glories of their lives. He needed to consume them and aim for even greater heights. He stood up. Time to go, then, he said to the empty space he was in, and began to walk forward. Chapter 2. A labyrinth corroded. Dino was depressed. Right now, he was advancing his way through Ramiriz's labyrinth, on orders from Feldway himself. Dino had only begun this mission, but already he was starting to wish he was anywhere else but here. His mind was screaming at him to take Pico and Gasha and just bug out of here, but it could never happen. Feldway's rule over him was absolute. Dino was allowed a mere limited degree of freedom. That bastard, he thought. This is such a drag. All he could do was curse himself for not being powerful enough to resist. But someone else was also bothering Dino. It was Vega, cheerfully and triumphantly leading the way for them. Whoa. I keep telling you to watch out for traps, man. Vega had just stepped on yet another switch, causing another giant boulder to tumble toward them. He should have seen this coming the moment the hallway started tilting uphill on them, but no, Vega really was stupid enough to fall for it. Dino's irritation was threatening to boil over. Why did it have to turn out like this for him? He thought back to how he got into this situation. May's skill brought them right to Tempest in an instant. There were 5 of them, her, Vega, Dino, Pico, and Gasha, and they exchanged looks in front of the labyrinth. It was time for one final talk before they dove in. Now listen, Vega said, from now on, you're following my orders, all right? Dino was already revolted by this, but it was Vega who was tasked with handling this mission. He could already picture the kind of trouble they'd no doubt have to deal with, but following Vega's lead was the only option allowed to him. And what kind of strategy do you have in mind? He asked. Simple, replied Vega, beyond confident in himself. We'll storm in right down the middle and beat the crap out of everyone in there. That'll earn you some experience as well, and once I eat all their strongest guys, I'll be that much stronger. How stupid can you get? Thought Dino. He beyond hated Vega by now. Vega wanted to give him all the dirty work while he just cruised in there and gained yet more power for himself. It was a ridiculous plan, and Dino wasn't afraid to say so. Whoa, are you crazy? This labyrinth is practically impregnable. I know I sound like I'm making excuses after we messed it up, but seriously, there's nothing but trouble in this joint. And that's not even the worst part. If any of them die in the labyrinth, they can get resurrected all they damn well want as long as Ramirez is there. You could kill them 1 billion times, and they still won't die. There's just no way we can conquer this place. Dino was talking like this wasn't the mission he was asked to carry out. Even when he was on Tempest's side, he was a little bit frightened by this place. Now that he'd switched allegiances, he deeply understood how fearsome it really was. All he wanted to do was go in, act like he was accomplishing something, and bail out as soon as he could. And Pico and Gasha were ready to follow him. Hey, Pico said, there are guys we can fight against in there, too, right? And they can't die, so they'll always go at us all the way. They don't even care about getting hurt. Like, it's not a fair match at all. Exactly, agreed Gasha. The guy I fought was ridiculously tough and tenacious and, just had the most persistent fighting spirit I ever saw. Having a born fighter like that pursue you, totally unafraid of death. Forget about it. Gasha must not have wanted to be there, either. She wasn't being shy about her feelings on it at all, and neither she nor Pico were putting in much of an effort, either. Maybe they could win inside the labyrinth a little more readily if they tried their hardest, but if their enemies could revive themselves all they wanted, their side was bound to falter sooner or later. They all knew that, and it wasn't very motivating. Right? So let's just cool this off before we waste any more time on it. Dino saw this as an honest word of advice for his boss. Tackling this labyrinth a second time also seemed like too much work to him, but he didn't mention that. But Vega was apparently even more of an idiot than Dino believed. Hey, no problem, man. They only resurrect if they're defeated, right? Huh? So I'll just eat them. Eat their bodies, and they can't resurrect after that. Is that, how it works? Dino wondered. He wasn't sure. He thought, however, that Ramirez's skill worked by applying itself to people's souls. As long as she could tap into the information stored inside these souls, she'd be able to reconstruct entire bodies without issue. No, but the thing about Ramirez is that her skill. So what? Vega smiled at Dino. Either way, I can gain power from the guys I eat, right? So if they get resurrected, I can beat him even more easily next time. Vega's steadfast belief in his own convoluted logic began to irritate Dino. No, the guardians of this labyrinth are better than that. You can't beat them that easily. He really wished Vega wouldn't talk like he had already conquered this thing. This is why I hate working with the utterly clueless. It'll be fine, man, Vega insisted. If you guys are gonna be that timid about this, I'll just use Create Dracobeast to generate some more minions. As long as I have the right food for 'em, I can create up to 4 at once. Viga's confidence knew no bounds. Dino wanted to stamp his feet in protest. Why does he refuse to listen to anyone? He had an urge to shout that to the heavens, but unfortunately, Viga held all the power in this group. The fault here lay with Feldway and the thrall he put over them. Dino could curse his own fate, but he had no choice but to do Viga's bidding. Well, I warned you, okay? Dino told Viga. Heh. You sure do worry too much. But fine. If it gets that bad, I can just use my ultimate skill Asdahak, Lord of Dark Dragons, to eat up the labyrinth itself. Don't be crazy, Dino spat. Are you stupid? Pico asked. Save that crap for the toilet, Gash quipped. Seriously? Said Mai. Viga's idea just now was so ridiculous, even the taciturn Mai had to join in. Quit treating me like an idiot. As strong as I am now, consuming a whole labyrinth like this is no problem whatsoever. Viga sneered at their retorts. They only inspired him further, and by the next moment, he had opened the labyrinth door, cutting off the debate. Any more talking was clearly useless, so Dino finally gave up. Okay, he said. You just want me to listen to you, so I will. That's the spirit. No matter how hopeless this expedition was, it was already set in stone. Viga had made up his mind, and the others had no way to defy him. Worst-case scenario, we can use my world map to escape, I hope, said Mai. I think that'll work, yeah. Dino tried to help Mai motivate herself a little. Entering and leaving Ramiriz's labyrinth was actually pretty headache-free, it accepted all who entered, and it wasn't too picky about keeping people inside. Dino knew it had some neat features like isolation chambers and the ability to shore up its defenses simply by adding more floors, but he hadn't heard anything about preventing people from leaving. Escape, at least, wasn't a major worry for him. Good to hear. You guys are wimps, so try not to slow me down too much. With that, Viga ventured inside. Dino followed right behind, Pico and Gasha taking a moment to steel their resolve before sheepishly joining him. Mai silently stepped in as well, and so they were invading the labyrinth with a group of just 5 people, the worst possible scenario Dino could think of. Dot. And now Viga's reckless march continued. Hey, weren't you gonna create some minion beasts for us? Dino, always looking for the easy way out, really wanted to see some Draco beasts with them soon. Will you shut up? Viga angrily replied. Wait a bit. I don't have any food for them. The monsters that should have been prowling the labyrinth halls were nowhere to be seen. There were some around, sure, but far fewer than usual, and they were all unintelligent little afterthoughts. Instead, the number of traps had skyrocketed compared to before. Guess they saw right through our plan, mused Dino. He was convinced of it. Their strategy meeting at the entrance was doomed to be overheard by the enemy. It was almost like Viga wanted it that way, so he felt relieved to see things turn out like this. All these traps, however, were really a drag. He'd really hoped things would have gone easier than this for him. Don't let your guards down, okay? Anything can happen in here, he cautioned. Yeah, I know, said Viga. I told you I was gonna corrode this labyrinth, didn't I? I'm counting on you guys to buy me some time for that. The moment they entered, Viga had begun his corrosion. It wasn't providing results yet, and that was to be expected. Ramiriz's labyrinth wasn't a living creature, so the ultimate skill Asdahak's dominate organic ability wouldn't work on it, but Viga wasn't giving up. He didn't really have a deep understanding of his skills, but he could feel them maybe working a little bit. So he was laying out microscopic magi bacteria on the walls of the labyrinth. This would normally be a pointless endeavor, and since it consumed his energy, he didn't have any to generate Draco beasts with. Even worse, despite all that effort, Viga was still tripping every trap they came across. Gasha was losing her patience. Can you stop taking the lead position, at least? Yeah, Stop setting off every single thing. Pico, too, was taking this chance to vent at Vega. It wasn't exactly the most cohesive of teams, but onward they went, deeper into the maze. There was a group monitoring these labyrinth raiders. Benimaru and his team were on the job, trusting in Raimaru's return and dedicated to protecting his home turf. Inside the control center at the bottom floor was a large monitor hanging from the wall front and center. Vega's party was shown on it, revealing everything they were up to. Benimaru was sitting on the commander's chair, a spot Veldora normally occupied, as he stared at the screen. Next to him was another special seat, this one set up in midair for Ramirez. It was miniature but gaudy and gorgeous, and it even came with a matching desk. The rest of the control center had been remodeled along the same lines as this chair. This included a lot of needless decoration, such as the rows of blinking lights put there strictly for a Starship Bridge atmosphere. Still, most of the room's tech was real, with screens and gauges all over the place allowing the staff to monitor everything going on in the labyrinth. Manning each of these stations were Thrainey's brethren. Playing conversation. Switch over to that one. Activate the trap. Data collection fully working. Enemy EP calculation complete. Everyone was dutifully handling their jobs. Vega's party was working its way past one trap after the other. It seemed like a pointless obstacle course at first, but it was actually a vital part of the labyrinth team's strategy. Benimaru, listening in on Vega, decided to prevent him from gaining any prey to consume. He was using traps to lure them down a path where they'd run into as few monsters as possible. Now they had made it past floor 50. Bovix and Equix, the usual bosses of this section, had been evacuated to safety. It was unclear if they'd be revivable after Vega ate them, and the control center staff didn't want to take needless risks. People could be fully revived from their souls alone, just as Dino feared, but there were still too many unknowns to contend with. What if Vega ate someone alive, for example? The labyrinth's reputation for absolute safety was at stake, so Benimaru and his peers played their hand as conservatively as possible. Still, this was certainly a novel way to tackle the labyrinth. Dino, who figured out Vega's plan first, was doing a fine job. They were past another boss floor, and what awaited them next was the cutting edge in scientific weaponry, all activated and ready. With the boss guardians missing from many floors, Ramirez had done some crash remodeling to much of the labyrinth. Those traps were designed to buy her more time for this effort as well. This was where things would start to get serious. "Well, here we go," Benimaru murmured. "Yeah, so far so good, huh?" Ramirez nodded, crossing her arms and putting a hand to her chin to look smart. She was giving the room an imposing smile, as if setting the atmosphere around here was job one for her at the moment. "Stop playing around and get to work," Shuna barked. She folded up her fan and bopped Benimaru on the head with it. "Ow. It hurts when you have it folded up, you know. Can't you be any kinder to your beloved brother?" The way he saw it, Shuna couldn't tell the difference between a playful love tap and a head-crushing blow. But Shuna didn't care. "I have no kindness for you. I understand that you're trying to ease your anxiety while Sir Raimaru is gone, but you need to stop with the games and be serious about this." Shuna was laying down the law, and she had a stout ally in Beretta. "Why are you wasting time, Lady Ramirez?" he asked sharply. "Lady Shuna is right, this is an emergency. If you don't shape up, I'm going to report this to Sir Raimaru when he returns." Ramirez began to panic. "Whoa. Wait, what are you talking about? I'm being totally serious right now." She was frantically making excuses. The gruff commander act from before was completely gone. "You too, Benimaru," added CI. "This is not playtime, as I'm sure you're aware. It's a battle we cannot afford to lose." Benimaru meekly nodded back at CI. "I know, but a commander needs to be relaxed." Ramirez eagerly joined Benimaru's excuse-making. "Yeah, he's right. We're trying to look as relaxed as possible to keep everyone from worrying." Benimaru, meanwhile, was thinking about how hard it was to imitate Rimuru style. No matter what kind of danger was up ahead, Rimuru would keep it casual at all times, helping everyone stay calm and gather themselves. When Benimaru tried the same thing, this was how people reacted. He tried to act unaffected, joining Ramirez in her games, but all that did was rile the more serious-minded in the room. Ramirez fired back at Beretta, grousing about how Rimuru never yelled at her for playing just a little, but it was time to move on from this topic anyway. Rimuru was a talent like no one else here, so trying to copy him in the first place was asking for trouble. Benimaru would just have to find his own way to calm everyone down. He and Ramirez exchanged glances, communicating their thoughts to each other. Then their attention turned back to their work as they gave out orders to deal with Viga's party. Things actually were proceeding as predicted so far. So what are the EP figures for the enemy? Benimaru asked. The black-haired girl here is at 1.66 million points, an operator replied. The bow she carries is a god-class weapon with 1 million points of its own for a total of 2.66 million EP. The 24 members of Dryasdol Dryad were carrying out their duties without Beretta having to micromanage them. They nimbly operated their control consoles, putting figures up on the main screen. On that screen right now was a young woman with her black hair in a ponytail. Her narrow eyes and taut, pink lips gave her a grimly serious look. This was my Foki, and her weapon was the crescent bow Aulia created. It had disappeared upon Aulia's death but manifested all over again after Viga took over the multi-weapon skill, and she had been borrowing it ever since. She had teleportation skills, didn't she? Normally, I'd want to take her out of the picture first, said Benimaru. I don't think that's possible. It's likely she can escape my labyrinth whenever she wants. In other words, Ramirez was saying, isolating her inside of here wouldn't work. That, too, was just as Dino thought. He might be lazy and selfish, but he could actually be pretty insightful. She is a threat, but killing her should be a last resort. Why is that? Ramirez asked Benimaru, curious. Because I'm sure Sir Rimuru wouldn't want it. Everyone had to agree with that. Mai was clearly from the same place Rimuru was, and still a child, no less. If she was here voluntarily, there'd be room for debate on this, but there was no doubting the fact that Feldway was controlling her. Killing her would have to wait until it was absolutely necessary. Ramirez didn't like killing very much anyway, so she readily agreed with Benimaru's assessment, but she didn't like just going along with him all the time, either, so she put on a gruff face. You're keeping things pretty loose, aren't you? She said. Everyone in the room knew exactly what she was thinking. Of course, Benimaru replied with a chuckle. If the commander stops being loose, the battle's doomed. That casual reply made everyone else loosen up, too. Calmness reigned once again in the control center. Next on the monitor was Pico. Regarding this young girl, an operator began. She wasn't young in terms of age, but that's how she was described. Ah yes, I fought her. I believe she called herself Pico, said Kumara, in one of the lower seats. Her eyes gleamed, maybe she wanted a rematch. We recorded her conversation, reported an operator. The subject's name is indeed Pico. She outlined Pico's vital statistics. Her existence rating was pegged at 1.89 million, and she bore a god-class trident, bringing the total to 2.89. Another tough customer. Sir Benimaru, I humbly beg you to let me pair with her in battle. I'll think about it, Kumara. It felt a bit too early to make that call. Next up was Gaasha. This was my opponent, observed Geld. She was quite the seasoned warrior, although she wasn't seriously trying at all. He seemed to be itching for round 2 as well, but Benimaru really wanted him to focus on healing. His wounds were gone, but Geld wouldn't be relieved of his fatigue that easily. The damage he'd taken from that skill had been passed around among his companions, but apparently, it all came back to him after the fight ended. He had to be shouldering a lot, and him on the battlefield right now would be suicide. Still, Benimaru understood Geld's feelings. He, too, was eager to fight on the front lines, despite not being fully recovered from the previous battle. Rimuru absence made him nervous, and fighting was a great way to work off those nerves. Now, however, they had to be careful with every move they made. It was too early for Geld to wade into battle, and that was Benimaru's final decision. He turned his attention to Gaasha's numbers. The subject Gaasha's EP is 2.44 million, and she's in possession of a God-class longsword and circle shield, an operator stated. That put her grand total at 4.44 million existence points, and that made Gaasha a classic example of why, when it comes to EP, bigger isn't necessarily better. If you wanted to inflate your number, you could always start wearing a lot of fancy gear, but that didn't connect to actual strength at all. There wasn't much God-class gear out there in the first place, and that gear didn't even mean anything unless you mastered its control. Gaasha was likely capable of bringing the most out of her gear, though, so she was still a serious foe to watch. How to handle this, I wonder, mused Benimaru as he looked at the next set of data. Now Dino was on the screen, looking wholly checked out. That was a familiar enough sight, but it made Ramirez see that her desk. You better be ready for me, Dino. I'm gonna make you pay big time for what you did to me. He couldn't hear her, but Ramirez didn't particularly care. This subject is Dino, the sleeping ruler and member of the Octagram, the operator began, although everyone knew that already. Dino's EP was pegged at 2.26 million, and the large God-class sword on his back was 2.2 million, pretty serious stuff. That gave him a total of 4.46 million EP, but he so doesn't want to be here, does he? Ramirez sounded sure of it. What makes you say that? Benimaru asked, although he figured she was probably correct. My sixth sense. My feminine sixth sense. Everyone in the room gave her a yeah, right look. The final party member to tackle was Vega, who was also the biggest threat. Everyone peered at the data on screen. His EP is 17.37 million. What a monster. Benimaru summed up what everyone was feeling. Only Diablo still had a smile on his face. Would you like me to step up and take care of him, perhaps? He asked, his smile widening. Benimaru hesitated for a moment. No, don't, he said before Diablo could protest. His skills are still largely an unknown to us. He got away from Testarossa once, after all. We need to exercise caution. Benimaru sincerely believed they'd get Vega this time, but he wanted to wait until the moment was ripe. They needed to at least peel Vega away from Mai, or he'd be able to escape at the drop of a hat. A clear plan of action was necessary to deal with this threat. Diablo was convinced enough of this, too, so he politely withdrew his offer. Now, said Ramirez, if you ask me, it looks like Vega's up to some real mean business at the moment. Benimaru nodded. Corrupting the labyrinth, yes? As in his conversation with Dino? Is that possible? Thraney asked. Huh? Of course not, Ramirez indifferently replied. No one else thought so, either. But, she continued, I think we might be better off not letting our guards down with that. I had kind of a bad feeling, so I looked closer into it, but I think he's seriously trying to eat up this whole thing. As she put it, Vega's Magi bacteria was threatening to fully cover the entire labyrinth. This structure was an imaginary creation, composed of neither organic nor inorganic matter, and since Magi bacteria only worked on organic objects, it was impossible for that stuff to affect it at all. However, Vega was still keeping up the effort. So, when he changes floors, he loses control over the bacteria he had before that point, I guess. Which I think he knows, but he had to be on the same plane as his Magi bacteria or else he'd lose control over them, but he was still spreading them around on every new floor he reached. Was there any point to this? In fact, there was. I mean, yeah, those little things are eating the weaker monsters on the floors, and it's boosting his power just a little bit each time it happens. Kinda gross, really. Great. Benimaru groaned. Another annoying foe to deal with. Getting Bovix and Equix out of there had been the right move. They were both seated, exchanging glances and breathing a sigh of relief. So, Diablo began, do we have a sample of this bacteria or whatnot he's released? Ramirez nodded. Of course we do. She crowed, ordering Beretta to bring a beaker-like object up for observation. Diablo took out a pinch of the matter inside and tried to destroy it. Certainly doesn't seem too tough, he noted. Benimaru did the same, using his fire to burn a small amount. As expected, it was easily killed, a reassuring sight. Once it's free of Viga's rule, it doesn't have that much life force left, does it? Said Benimaru. Indeed, replied Diablo. We had best thoroughly cleanse the labyrinth of them when we can, though, just in case. Viga's growth was simply astonishing. There was no telling whether his effects would rub off on this stuff and trigger a sudden mutation or something, so safety had to come first. And in fact, the EP of Viga, and Viga alone, was fluctuating a bit and in an ominous way. They had to stop him then and there, or he'd become an even more serious threat later. Now that everyone was on the same page about this, the way forward was clear. Once Mai and Viga were separated, Benimaru and the others needed to address their anxieties for the future by eliminating Viga. Since Ghidorah was absent at the moment, the guardian of Floor 60 was the demon Colossus. It was designed for overwhelming violence and ordered to eliminate any intruders it saw. After some key adjustments by old Ghidorah, it now had a variety of weapons at its disposal, each more heinous than the last. No normal band of adventurers could hope to deal with it. But when faced with Dino's party, that power did little more than slow their advance for a bit. Ugh, moaned Dino. All this trouble it put us through. I can't believe how tough-skinned the thing was. Also, why did it disappear into that cloud of light particles? I hate to even think it, but you think maybe the golems in here get resurrected, too? Pico and Gasha weren't too happy to be here, either, a common opinion as of late. But Mai, looking supremely serious compared to them, didn't see it that way. Come on, that's silly, she said. We're talking golems here. It seemed like a fair point to everyone. But one could never be assured of anything in the labyrinth, and Dino knew that more than anyone else. He wasn't too proud to let everyone know, either. Yeah, sure, think that if you want. Like I said, anything's possible in here. He thought he could lord it over them by saying that, but only May's cold stare acknowledged his words at all. Of course, noted Gasha, even if he could revive, he's not that much of a threat. It would be an annoyance, I'll admit, said Mai. Dino understood that he was sounding a little ridiculous, but the labyrinth itself was the most ridiculous thing of all, a fact he wanted to shout to the heavens. The idea of man-made golems getting resurrected in here struck him as terribly unfair, but when he recalled Ramirez's evil grin, he was too afraid to discount the possibility entirely. She might just be able to do it. Then he suddenly remembered, wasn't she conducting research along those lines? He didn't hear anything about a breakthrough yet, but the research facility was pretty much a den of monsters at this point, and the memory of what he saw down there made it impossible to banish his worries. The thing that made him fret so much was how the lab was populated by a bunch of folks with more than a few screws loose. The slime, first and foremost, but also Ghidorah, the vampires, Kaijin, his beloved boss Vesta, and so forth. They were constantly making giant leaps forward in their research, so Dino wouldn't have been surprised if they'd implemented self-resurrecting golems by now. Ramirez, too, was just as scary as all those guys. She wasn't physically strong enough to threaten anyone, but her brain was her most lethal weapon. People were often tricked by how she acted and sounded, but she was actually pretty intelligent. That was how this labyrinth was so quickly converted into an impregnable military fortress. Like, seriously, can't we go home yet? Dino grumbled. He couldn't be blamed for whining like that. Then, as if fated all along, his fears came true. Okay, here we go. Today I'm offering you all a full-course meal of our very best golems. Have fun with them. The ebullient voice of Ramirez echoed across the halls, and then the nightmare began. Laser beams dancing all around, lava that flowed like someone overturned a blast furnace, missiles that constantly pursued them, hypersonic waves that destroyed any will to go on. That and the thermite plasma, a rain of it, forming flames that never fizzled out. Ramirez is enjoying every damn minute of this. Dino was crying bitter tears of rage now. He had good reason to. They were the test subjects for a litany of brand new weapons, and he just wanted it all to stop. None of it was lethal on contact or even all that worrisomely damaging, but it was a huge blow to his psyche, and if Ramirez kept it up long enough, it would exhaust him in time. He didn't have anything as useful as a barrier that resisted everything, and Rimuru probably knew that when he devised this gauntlet, so of course it was going to impact him hard. Even worse, Ramirez was capable of implementing all the insane ideas Rimuru had come up with. Like, why would they set up a blast furnace in this labyrinth? It was an impossible sight normally, but once Ramirez was on the job, she just made it happen. And right now, before their eyes. See? It did resurrect. Oh, come on. What's with this place? Pico and Gasha both shouted in unison, likely having anticipated this outcome. Like, Dino said a moment later, if they can revive man-made objects, I mean. Can't Ramirez just give us a freaking break already? I'm sorry, the serious-minded my softly stated, I never expected this. Ramirez had warned him about this cavalcade of golems, and she meant it, as Dino now saw. The golem that had vanished into a swarm of particles was now back and in like new shape. And there were more of them. Ramirez was busting out everything in stock, including the newest types and test models. You're just harassing me now, aren't you, Ramirez? Dino hollered as he tried his best to handle this barrage. Inside Ramirez's domain, all her subordinates enjoyed immortality, but if that applied to inorganic golems, too, the threat was incalculable. It only dawned on Dino now that he was opposing her, but Ramirez's intrinsic skill macecraft was the epitome of unfairness. He couldn't believe how much he looked down on her all this time. Finally, it's calmed down a little, Dino said, breathing a sigh of relief. Gasha nodded. Yeah. It's gotta if they run out of material. They had been forced to fight for 3 hours straight, but at long last, there was no sign of any golems coming back to life on them. It looked like the missiles and gunfire, at least, couldn't be magically restarted by Ramirez's skill. If they could, Ramirez could easily create a perpetual motion machine next, so that made sense. Dino had factored that into the strategy he came up with for his party, and it had paid off for him at long last. I'm so tired. Like, if you didn't bash the engine out of that thing for us, we would have been fighting forever, huh? I owe you one for pointing it out to me, Dino. He had suggested that I separate the golems' engines from their main bodies and teleport them outside of the labyrinth. The spirit cores that golems ran on could produce energy forever as long as they had magicules to feed on. If things hadn't worked out for them, then Pico was right, they'd be fighting until the end of time. Having a talented dominate space user like Mai on hand was what allowed this approach to strut its stuff. Having to fight together in such close quarters for so long also helped break the ice between Mai and the rest of the party. The battle was an exhausting slog from start to finish, but it wasn't all bad, either. Still, though. Dino flashed a dirty look at Vega, who was meditating in a Zen position. They'd held their ground here, never fleeing, solely because this man had ordered them to. Listen, you four. Vega boomed. I am going to seize all the labyrinth's capabilities right here and now. It looks like I lose all connections to previous floors when we go to a new one, so I'm gonna try my luck with this while you're beating the boss here. It didn't sound at all like it'd work, but Vega wasn't going to take no for an answer before he could even try it. So they all reluctantly agreed, or were forced to agree anyway. All this torment was primarily Vega's fault, and Dino wasn't even trying to hide his annoyance. Hey, so is it working? Dino asked. Oh. Vega opened his eyes a smidge. Not too badly, he said, stretching as he stood up. I figured out one thing, at least, my skill doesn't work on inorganic objects after all. Him shamelessly bringing this up did little to cheer Dino. What? So all that effort on our part just went to waste? He didn't really make an effort, but yes, he had been put to work for 3 whole hours. That, to Dino, was hard labor, and he thought he had the right to complain about it. But Vega paid his irritated companion no mind. I lose control over my magi bacteria when we change floors, which proves that the labyrinth is set up so every floor is in its own separate dimension. So if I enter a floor and cover it with my skill, everything inside of it becomes my meal. Right? Good idea, huh? Vega liked to think and talk to himself a lot more than listen to anyone. His optimism was laudable, but he didn't care one bit about the rest of his party. Dino wanted to scream at him but resisted the urge, because Vega wasn't talking complete nonsense. Okay. So let me just confirm this, if your bacteria or whatever fully cover an area, is it possible for us to teleport over there? Dino asked. Huh? No. Of course not. Vega sounded pretty confident. I think that's asking too much, added Mai. I mean, it's already hard enough to figure out the exact coordinates of a living creature. Calculating those sorts of locations with any precision was difficult inside a constantly changing space like this. Jumping from inside the labyrinth over to the outside was simple enough, but as Mai put it, the opposite wasn't true. Dino, hearing this, grinned. Well, this means that we're unlikely to get snuck up on, right? You're eating the monsters we kill, and we're wiping up everything else. That's pretty huge. We can keep enemies from running away, too, and I bet we could think of some other uses. As said before, Dino was no fool. He had keen insight into anything that would make life easier for him. Gaining more food to eat would give Vega more energy to work with, which meant he'd start creating those Dracobeasts for him, and that should make things a lot more chill for the rest of the party. He knew that Rimuru and his friends could teleport anywhere they wanted to inside Ramirez's labyrinth, and if they could prevent that, maybe Vega was onto something really big. However, trying out his idea on this golem floor wouldn't help at all. They'd need to see how well it worked on the next one down. It sounded valid to Dino, and Vega, hearing this, was elated. Wow, great, great. You understand me after all, don't you, Dino? But yes, as long as I'm around, it'll be easy to conquer the rest of this place. He was getting pretty carried away. Great, thanks. Stop slapping me on the shoulder like that. Now, can you summon some Dracobeasts for us? Sure thing, man. I'm gonna focus on taking over this labyrinth down on the next floor, too, so sweep things up for me, okay? Dino nodded. He just wanted to avoid work, so he was ready to accept Vega's suggestion. If he was all for it, then Pico and Gasha were, too, and Mai was going to follow along no matter what. What started as a hasty, unplanned assault on the labyrinth was starting to take on a much more palpable form. By the time they climbed down to it, floor 61 seemed terribly anticlimactic. The enemies are all gone, huh? Right after that all-out attack? Said Vega. Isn't it supposed to be nothing but undead from floor 61 down? Dino asked. You're right, said a surprised Mai. There aren't even any weaker monsters around. The higher floors were a lot more painful than this. Tisk. What, they scared of me now? What's the point of trying to take over this floor, then? Well, Dino said to Vega, I'm gonna guess that whoever was here left to take on Dagrel. He was right to assume that, but Mai gave him a surprised look. What? No way. How many monsters got taken out of here? A spatial motion expert like her was curious about what kind of operation it was. Oh, I don't know. 10,000 or so. Mai gasped. Is that even possible? I think a Dalman could do it, at least. It'd be an alternate take on summoning the dead for him. Dino didn't really care about how difficult a task that was, despite Mai's shocked reaction, but they're using the monsters that run wild in here for their army, too? That's kind of against the rules, isn't it? Pico asked. It's beyond that, Basha told her. I never would have come up with that idea in a million years. Yeah, well, don't ask me to explain it. Go bother Rimuru instead. I'm just as weirded out by this as you. Dino was done fighting. The lack of enemies meant he had no work to do, giving him the time to shoot the breeze with his companions. So they kept on walking until they found a floor with monsters lurking inside. It didn't happen until floor 71. Ah, yeah, Zejan's still in here, Dino whispered with a hint of concern. With all the wriggling insects around them, there was no way that their Lord Zejan wouldn't be joining them. It made Dino tear up a little. Now he and his party were assuredly about to get their asses kicked. Okay. Just like the plan, all right? Get going, a cheerful Vega said. I'll put in an effort, I guess, Dino lazily replied. He figured that if they weren't going to win, what was the harm in letting Vega do what he wanted? So Vega sat down, attempting to corrode the labyrinth once again. He shrank his own cells, turning them into magi bacteria, and then thinly spread them around until they covered every surface. Dino really wished he'd broken out some of those Draco beasts first, but apparently, he couldn't control them and the magi bacteria at the same time. Not even Vega was omnipotent, so summoning those beasts would tap his coffers pretty quickly. Well, so be it. Let's just hunt down these bugs and feed them to Vega, Dino told the rest of the crew. Right. Sounds good. So began the insect hunt, with Dino's party protecting the home base where Vega sat. Vega, meanwhile, was evolving his ultimate skill Aztahak in an unthinkable new direction, and he didn't even realize it. In a small room within floor 71, Vega was seated and meditating. He was used to this now, having done the same thing several times before on other floors, but this time he had a new, clearer goal. Eager to get to work, he began to release his skill. He tried to corrode the labyrinth, like he did every time, but nothing happened. Of course it didn't. Aztahak, Lord of Dark Dragons, held sway over organic matter, so it couldn't do a thing against the imaginary matter this labyrinth was made of. Trying to take over the labyrinth like this was never going to work. But Vega was actually making a very wrong assumption. In fact, despite possessing it, he completely misunderstood Aztahak from the ground up. His skill was still only in the developing stages, and since he thought it only worked on organic matter, he was looking to consume energy with it, not seize it for his own. Organic matter was easier for Vega's body to take in, and it also formed the cores that Draco beasts ran on. The real essence of Aztahak, however, lay in absorbing the power from whatever it consumed. If that was impossible against a given target, it could still seize that energy through an ability known as Absorb Skill. If he wanted to take on the entire labyrinth, it was Absorb Skill he should have been tapping into, not Dominate Organic. Vega hadn't picked up on that yet. Instead, he was letting himself get carried away, skipping whole steps of the procedure as he unleashed the full brunt of his skill. Normally, he applied the brakes to this sort of thing since it burned through energy at a breakneck speed, but he wanted to show off his capabilities to Dino and the rest of the party. He could tell they were openly looking down on him, which was another motivation of his. So, giving way to his instincts, he tried chewing on the labyrinth one more time, swallowing it whole. Ho? Haven't gotten a reaction like this before. There was a new question in his mind. The feeling wasn't so inorganic any longer. He had the vague impression that he was finally getting somewhere. Whoa, this can work, can't it? This was a rush like nothing before it. The ultimate skill Aztahak, if he ran its feelers into and along the ground, could take in organic matter and create infinite copies of its master. What would happen, though, if this feature of it was thrown against the labyrinth? The results were shocking. It failed to take in the imaginary matter this place was made of, but it promptly began sucking away the energy of the labyrinth itself. Working its way into the natural environment around Vega, it gave him the opportunity to create infinite copies of himself, making him part of the natural landscape. That was the true essence of Aztahak, and this was the correct way to harness it. Vega had unconsciously learned it, and now he was making it his own. Once an environment was sucked dry of its energy, it was destroyed and doomed to perish. Vega had no way of knowing that, and even if he did, it wouldn't have bothered him. The problem was what waited on the other side of this. If Vega somehow found a way to fully assimilate himself into Ramires's labyrinth, he'd be able to take over full ownership of it, just like that. Ramires's macecraft skill would become Vega's, and that was far too powerful a skill to put in the hands of somebody like him. It'd do more than just destroy him, it would create a truly terrifying situation. Vega, unaware of any of that, pressed forward. This feels so incredible. I'm taking in energy directly from the labyrinth itself. Maybe I can't take it over, but at the very least, I'm guaranteed not to be the loser today. With the infinite stores of energy